The Scottie Pippen episode. We've got to talk about it. It's everywhere. It's all over social media. He recently has done a podcast, or he was a guest on the podcast, the Give Me the Hot Sauce podcast with Stacey King, Mark Shanowski and Timmy Whispers. Those guys are awesome, by the way. Amazing podcast, amazing guest. Just brilliant. Scottie Pippen's on. Now, we're going to get into it all. I put a tweet out. It was a bit tongue-in-cheek. I took a snippet of a quote from this podcast, from Scottie Pippen, saying, Michael Jordan was a horrible player. He was horrible to play with. And I captioned that in a tweet, along with the GIF. Scottie Pippen at the time, when he was begging MJ to return from retirement, when he's got his Jordans out and he's, you know the clip. That was last night, and that tweet went crazy. It's every time I open my phone, I've got like 20 plus notifications. It doesn't matter if it's 2 minutes or whatever. It's gone. My phone's gone nuts. I haven't even read probably 3/4 of the comments or the quote tweets because it's just gone crazy. I think it's got 6 million views, like 3,000 retweets and 23,000 likes, something like that, something crazy. And I wanted to clear it up because it was a snippet of the interview, okay? It was a bit of a jokey tweet in a way. I didn't expect it, obviously, to go anywhere near as crazy as it did. There's been a lot of people hating on Scottie Pippen over the last couple of years, and yeah, he said some questionable things, and since The Last Dance come out, there's been some issues. Obviously, he didn't like the way he was portrayed in that, which I get, right? We all know that was about MJ. That is what it is. And in the comments on this tweet, there was a lot of people absolutely ripping into Scottie, tearing him, talking about his personal life. Not very nice. And there was other people defending him, saying, well, this was a small quote, it was out of context, which absolutely, yes, it was. So I've listened to the full episode of the Stacey King's Give Me the Hot Sauce podcast with Scottie Pippen, listened to the whole thing. Brilliant episode, by the way. I've seen a few people call Stacey out for not calling Pippen out. Nonsense. I think Stacey, Mark and Timmy did a great job. I really do. I think it was brilliant. They let Scottie just talk and get his opinions. And yeah, listen, this is how I feel about Scottie Pippen. I'm wearing his jersey. Okay, I love Scottie Pippen. Big part of my childhood. There's his jersey there. It's not signed, unfortunately. Him and Jordan, like the best duo to ever play the game, right? That's my opinion. I think maybe I'm a little bit biased being a Bulls fan, but you cannot change my opinion on that. They were the best duo to ever play the game. Now, since all this nonsense come out after The Last Dance, I think a lot of people feel the same way I do. Like, it kind of put a massive dampener on what we grew up watching. And we would love to think that Scottie and MJ were the best of friends to this day, and everyone's happy and all roses. And that's not the case, clearly, and I get it, right? I understand Scottie's view, but also what we got to remember is a lot of the stuff that Scottie has perhaps said. Remember where he was in his personal life at these times. And now I'm not making excuses for him, but he lost his son, and I can't even begin to imagine what that's like. And hopefully none of you guys have done that, or nobody should go through that, right? That sucks. I honestly don't know what person I'd become if that happened to me. I just don't know. And I don't think you should judge someone until you've put yourself in their situation. So, I'm not making excuses for him, but you've got to remember that. Now, you've also got to remember his ex-wife, what they're going through. She's obviously with Michael Jordan's son, Marcus, now. Again, not ideal for the guy. It's so tough. I'm not making excuses, but I do, part of me, feel really sorry for Scottie Pippen for what he's had to go through the last couple of years. Now, this interview with Stacey King, it wasn't slaughtering MJ. It wasn't putting MJ down completely. It was his opinions of Michael Jordan. He also said a similar sort of thing about Phil Jackson, which was a shock to me, and I think it was to Stacey as well. He's not actually spoke to Phil Jackson since his playing days, which is crazy. He kind of felt that Michael and Phil weren't on his side, etc., etc. He called them both selfish. Again, that's his opinion. He's entitled to that. So I just wanted to put some context on that crazy tweet that went viral. Stacey asked Scottie, when LeBron James is done, where does he rank as the greatest player? Now, this is a direct quote from Scottie Pippen. I got a way of scoring all this. There is not a greatest player. I'm going to put myself in there if you're talking about the greatest player. What makes Michael Jordan great? Is it because he had the media give him the MVPs? Jokic is great, and they didn't even put him on the bleep bleep team. He goes on to talk about Nikola Jokic, and he should have three-peated in the MVP race, etc., etc. So there was a little bit that I've cut out of that. He then goes on to say, and this is where the horrible part comes in, LeBron James is probably one of the greatest winners to ever play the game. He wins. He ain't won that many championships, but he's been in the finals. Name somebody else that can win and get to where he's got. Now, does that make him the greatest player to ever play the game? No. Michael Jordan probably is the greatest individual scorers that we've ever seen. But then he goes on to say, but probably not. It's probably Kareem. So it's hard for me to say who's the greatest player to play the game. He then goes on to talk about Bill Russell. He never obviously watched him play live, but he's seen a lot of clips. He said he wasn't the biggest fan of his game, but couldn't deny his talent. And then he says, I said this many years ago and I got criticised for it. When LeBron James leaves the game, he will be the greatest statistical player to ever play the game. Look at my point on this day. Probably 15 years later, because I said it when he was 2 or 3 years into the game. Because he was filling up the stats every game. So they made the comparison, who's greater, him or Michael. LeBron will be the greatest statistical guy to ever play the game of basketball, and there's no comparison to him. None. Does that make him the greatest player to ever play the game? I'll leave that out for debate because I don't believe that there's a great player, because our game is a team game and one player can't do it. I see Michael Jordan play before I came with the Bulls. You guys seen him play. He was a horrible player. He was horrible to play with. He was all one-on-one. He was shooting bad shots. And all of a sudden, we become a team and we start winning. Everybody forgot who he was. Everybody forgot who he was. He was a player that really winning wasn't at the top of his category. It was scoring. He was going after scoring titles. It wasn't until Phil Jackson showed up that kind of changed the menu a little bit, and that still took some time. But that wasn't in the documentary. End quote. Stacey King then replied with, there was a lot of things that weren't in the documentary. So that's the full quote. Now, when you take that into context, he's not slaughtering MJ there. He's saying that before Pippen joined the Bulls, and obviously before Phil joined the Bulls, it was all about MJ. And until he let his ego go a bit and become more of a team player, that's when the winning starts. So that's the full contents behind the tweet that went crazy. And listen, he didn't really slaughter MJ in this episode. He put Michael Jordan on his Mount Rushmore. Scottie asked his Mount Rushmore of basketball without Scottie included. He ended up picking 5 guys. He went with, in order, Kareem, Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, Karl Malone, and then he added at the end he would put LeBron on. And then he said at the very end he would actually change Magic for Kobe. So this isn't a man who hates Michael Jordan, okay? He's put him on his Mount Rushmore, even though it was 5. Well, even if it was 4, okay? He named him 3rd, so he's on his Mount Rushmore. It was nice to I've watched it and I've listened to it as well, and I think we can hopefully move forward and nobody hates Scottie, because just remember what he did for us, right? We don't have 6 of these. Yeah, just an excuse to get this out, really. We don't have 6 of these without Scottie Pippen. Michael Jordan said it himself in his Hall of Fame speech. You can't talk of Michael Jordan without talking of Scottie Pippen. There you go. We don't have those without both of those guys. He did also mention, they were talking about the 91 series against the Lakers and the defensive switch from Michael Jordan guarding Magic Johnson to Scottie guarding Magic. And this was his quote from that. MJ was not going to be as effective on him as we needed him to be to win the series. As we all know, Mike, he wanted the hype as well, so we had to go through that process, but he didn't allow his ego to go on too far, at least in that series. He was definitely willing to bow down and do whatever it took. Obviously, it was going to be our first championship. He didn't want to waste no opportunities, and he had to make that adjustment. There's a little dig about his ego in there, but listen, we all know MJ's got a big ego, right? So, again, he's not slating MJ. He's not putting him down. He's just telling it from his side. I just think we stop hating on Scottie and just remember how great he was. And he was great for our team. And listen, I got fed up of listening to Scottie talk after The Last Dance and stuff. I even bought his book and I've not read it. I don't want to read it because I remember when that came out, there was lots of snippets from it that was all kind of where this started as well. And I know he's got books to sell and stuff, but I haven't read it, and I don't know if I ever will. But I've got a signed Scottie Pippen book, which is pretty cool. So let's stop hating on Scottie. Let's remember the good times. And yeah, I'm sorry if that tweet, I think it did offend quite a few people. Now, what was funny in that tweet is I had LeBron James stands in my DMs basically telling me that MJ was a fraud, etc., etc., which is just hilarious. And I just simply replied with a picture of MJ's finals record and LeBron's finals record. For the record, I think we should just appreciate greatness. And there's different eras, right? I think most people think that if MJ was in today's game, he's probably averaging 50 a night, the way the game's played now. But, you know, these eras of greatness, and there were great players before MJ. Your Bill Russells, your Kareems, your Magic Johnsons, then your MJs, now your LeBrons, now we're going into Giannis, Jokic. We have to just compare. Like, why? I mean, I get it. I do it on Twitter, right? But I do it mainly to wind people up a little bit. Obviously, a Bulls account. So I'm going to back my guy, MJ. I think he's my favourite player of all time, and that will never change. For me, he will always be the GOAT. Always. But we also have to respect greatness. And whether you love him or hate him, you cannot deny how great LeBron James was, is. He's still playing, right? You can't deny it. But yeah, I do that just for clout on Twitter. Anyway, that's it, guys. I just wanted to put a video out, and hopefully people watch this and don't hate on Scottie too much. He was so good for us. Let's just remember the good days and forget all the bitterness. Move on. Let's move on. Go Bulls.